Early in the new year, this was just before the fall of Singapore, hurricanes were needed out in the Far East urgently. And one of the carriers, Indomitable, appeared at Port Sudan on the Red Sea. They loaded the Hurricane Squadron, and with their pilots and their ground crew, 50. And we rushed out to Indian Ocean, like past Aden, out to the Indian Ocean and off Sumatra, flew these 50 Hurricanes off. And they almost flew into Japanese hands because Singapore was just about to fall. And back up to the Red Sea and picked up another 50. But anyway, Singapore had fallen, and we were on our way, and we knew that Singapore had gone, and we had no idea what we were going to do with these 50 Hurricanes. We were hoping we might take them to Sydney, but that didn't come off. We took them into Trincomalee, into Colombo. The Japanese fleet came out into the Indian Ocean, and these 50 Hurricanes were in Ceylon, unbeknown to the Japanese, I imagine.
The Formidable. That was in 1942 that I was sent to the Formidable. 818 Squadron changed completely. We worked up a new squadron up in North in the Hudson and Orkney. Got a new squadron together, new CO, new everything, and I was still with 818. And we were sent to join the Formidable. And we were going out to Ceylon, or that it was then. And when we got to Ceylon, somebody decided that the squadron, 818, was to be disbanded. And I went into 820 Squadron on board the Formidable at Colombo.
We had no idea that they were coming. I suppose Admiralty might have known, but we had no idea because we were at sea. We had Warspite. Warspite had been refitted in America, crossed the Pacific, round Australia and into the Indian Ocean. It formed part of the newly formed Eastern Fleet, which was... There was no fleet required there at the time because the Japanese had only just come into the war and there was not much naval activity. So the Eastern Fleet was a fleet in name only.
And then we set sail for Singapore. On the way to Singapore, we heard that the Prince of Wales had been sunk. So then they diverted us to the Philippines. On the way to the Philippines, we heard the Japanese had taken it. So we had to meet Euler. We were running short of fuels, cruising around. And out of nowhere, in the Pacific, a big Euler came, and we got enough fuel on board for the rest of the journey. Wherever we set sail for, wherever we were going, the Japs took it before we got there. Till in the end we finished up in the harbour in Sydney, Australia. And we'd just been at sea 7 weeks then. From there we sailed to Mombasa, where Admiral Somerville came on board then. He was the Eastern Fleet, Admiral of the Eastern Fleet. What Eastern Fleet we had. They were trying to build a fleet up, which was useless really. We were the only modern battleship there, the Warspite. There was an old one came out, Revenge. There was a carrier, an old carrier, came out with 2 Dutch destroyers, 2 Polish destroyers, and 3 English destroyers. And to me, that was the fleet.
and they started to build it up. Warspite joined us, the Indomitable was there, and a couple of cruisers. We had some of the old R-class battleships, Ramillies, Resolution, which could only do about 15 knots. They weren't much use at all. With the Japanese getting up, advancing up Burma on land and having their move out into the Indian Ocean, it seemed as if Trincomalee might not be a suitable base. And this caused Admiralty, I imagine, the powers that be back here in the UK, to look for another base. And we had a couple of islands in the Indian Ocean, the Maldive group, Ado Atoll, where we stationed oil tankers for replenishing ships coming through, but not suitable for an organised base.
And there had been intelligence information that the Japanese were planning some form of raid or foray into the Indian Ocean, and we felt we had very little time in which to get ourselves organised as a fleet in order to meet them, in a fit state to meet them. Warspite had arrived as the new fleet flagship for the Indian Ocean, but the remains of the rest of the fleet were still on their way out from home to join. 4 R-class battleships, including the Resolution and the Ramillies, were coming round the Cape to join, and also 3 modern aircraft carriers who had been last occupied in ferrying aircraft into Singapore for its defence. They had had no recent action experience, operating experience as aircraft carriers and fighters to defend the fleet. Incidentally, I haven't told you, the C&C was Admiral Sir James Somerville, who had been in command of Force H, operating from Gibraltar up till then.
When I was flying off the Formidable, I changed to 820 Squadron, and that was the Albacore aircraft that I was flying, not Swordfish then. And we did lots of patrols, and we went to places called, one of these Maldives called Ado Atoll yonder. Oh God, it was hot, really hot. Yeah. The deck officer, Commander Cubitt, had to dive for it, meaning that an aircraft was going to hit him. He dived over the side, but he hurt his back that bad that he couldn't continue. I think he was invalided out, I think. And the question was, they had to get a deck officer, and I was made deck officer of the Formidable, with another chap, a fellow called Cannon. So the two of us run the deck of the HMS Formidable, organising the aircraft up and down in the lifts, and organising, and also landing the aircraft on with the bats, and sending them off, putting them onto steam pack catapults, and sending them off, and things like that, organising everything on the deck.
So they were going to form a quick fleet to go out, so we were one of them. We took the Admiral out, I can't remember the Admiral's name now, but we took the Admiral out, and the thing that stands in my mind was that at one stage going out to the Far East, we went to Mombasa first. We were virtually operating from Mombasa across to Colombo, and then a bit east of Colombo into the Pacific Ocean, just on patrol. But when he took us out there, he cleared lower deck and he said one lesson he'd learned, that he would not split his force, because they'd gathered ships from all around the world to form a fleet. And the Admiral, when cleared lower deck, he said that he wouldn't split his force. We were at anchor in Colombo Harbour, one of the periods we were there, and there was a report that there was a Jap force at sea, so we immediately put to sea and went out towards the east into the Pacific. And we had the Hermes, an old carrier, with us as well. We were familiar with us, still a new carrier. Hermes, an old carrier. She couldn't keep up because we were going too fast. So the Admiral sent the Hermes back to Colombo. He told the 2 County class cruisers, the Dorsetshire and Cornwall, to escort her back.
About a week after I arrived in Bombay, the Warspite sailed and rendezvoused with this fleet. On paper, most impressive. 4 15-inch battleships, 3 aircraft carriers. I've forgotten how many cruisers, but probably 4 or 5 cruisers, and destroyers. An international force, because there were Dutch ships there also from Dutch East Indies. But in fact, we met at sea, and the CNC had not had any opportunity to meet his captains or his admirals before getting braced to take their first operation, make their first operation. The other problem at that time was that the R-class battleships had insufficient fresh water capacity to last any long sea voyages, and so they were already short of water when we rendezvoused just east of the Maldive Islands. And after 2 days, we had to put in at Ghan, which was an atoll island, primarily to replenish water, but also fuel and stores for the whole fleet. We achieved this with no time to spare, because the Japanese striking force appeared on the scene the day after we had completed our restoring and re-watering.
But anyway, one afternoon, we got an enemy report from one of our planes. And, it was a complete shock. They reported, I think it was 4 capital ships, which is battleships and carriers. And the enemy reporting code that we had in those days was almost plain language. BS was battleship, CR was cruiser, and so forth. All they did was the formation, course and speed, and the position. And that was it. The air gun was a telegraphist. It had to be quick. And in plain language on the end of it, he attached, and being attacked by zeros. Because the Japanese had spotted him as well. And they were only 80 miles away from us. Our first thoughts were scratch one swordfish. But we learned later that these swordfish are very, very slow. And he got down on just above the water, and the zeros couldn't fire at him because they were too fast, and they'd overshoot him and crash. And so he made it back to the carrier. And knowing that they were so close, we thought, it's a certainty that, that we're going to meet them that night. Two of us against, that mob, I think they had something like 300 aircraft. In theory, maybe not all serviceable, but they could carry that number. So the word went around, and I believe in Nesta, where a very good friend of mine was a torpedoman, the torpedo officer came round to the torpedo crews and said, well, it's going to be up to you chaps tonight, torpedo attack. Night passed, daytime came, and no sign of the Japanese. They'd turned away during the night, and they left the Indian Ocean and never came back. But meantime, they'd attacked Colombo. They'd sunk the old Hermes and an Australian destroyer with them, two Kennedy-class cruisers, the Dorsetshire and Cornwall, and every merchant ship in the Bay of Bengal just was sunk. There was a list that long of merchant ships.
It must have been a difficult decision for the C&C to make, whether to actively intervene in the operations of the Japanese striking force with a distinct possibility or probability of further heavy losses of our own ships after the Prince of Wales and Repulse. So we continued to maintain a position between the Molders and Ceylon, and we could just see on the edge of our radar screens the Japanese aircraft which were launching attacks on Colombo and Trincomalee and sinking two 8-inch cruisers, the Cornwall and the Dorsetshire, and one old aircraft carrier, the Hermes, which was in Trincomalee Harbour. We'd see them when they were flying high, but naturally when they came down to attack, they were below the line of view.
Next morning, we're steaming off the Maldives, and a destroyer in the destroyer screen reported Carly rafts and lifeboats. Sent them over to investigate, and that was all that was left of the Dorsetshire and Cornwall. The Japs who got them. He split his force. One thing he said he wouldn't do, the first time he did it, we lost 3 capital ships.
I was then allocated to Trincomalee, which was the naval base, and sat ashore there until one night I was sent for and said to report to the jetty, take the little bit of luggage you had. You must understand, we still had no full kits or anything like that, so I never lost anything on Hermes because I had nothing to lose. I then went down to the jetty, and the officer in charge there said, Hermes for you, Captain Starboard Battery. Right, sir. Took me little grip on board. We sailed at midnight, stayed at action stations all night, so I never went down on the mess deck. I never knew what my bunk was. I never knew what my mess was or anything. We were fed in the starboard battery corned beef sandwiches. As dawn broke, the action station alarm went, and so the bombers came in.
The Hermes was lying off Trincomalee, and when this battle fleet with its carrier came in, and Japanese men and sunk it. And not only that, they destroyed quite a few aircraft that were at Trincomalee. Some trying to get away were shot. The whole lot were shot down. Yeah.
They spread the survivors around amongst the ships. What I thought was a bit foolish at the time, we had a signalman come on board us who came off the carrier, and I thought, well, the last place to put him was on another carrier if he'd just been bombed. And he told me that the action station sounded, and he was running through the hangar to his action station, and the next thing he was swimming in the water. So he was blown apart. They reckon there's about 50 dive bombers dived on it from this Jap force. We never saw the force in the main, but they reckon there was more than one force out.
Same formations. High-level bombers, low-level bombers, and torpedo bombers. And it worked out. High-level, low-level, and torpedo bombers coming in from the sides as well.
So
it was a definite pattern of the attack on Repulse and Prince of Wales. We were hit first. Vampire was our escorting destroyer. Of course, you remember, she had been picked me up off Repulse. The bombs just rained down. Hermes was an old ship, caught on fire, and started to heel over. As we started to heel over, I saw Vampire had been hit as well, and she was on fire. So I started my usual evacuation run. Never go to the side that she's sinking, down the other side. Walk down the side of the ship. Usual dive into the water. I said, off we go again. No bloody justice. Started swimming. Vampire had sunk by now. She was gone. I started swimming. And I must have been about 6 or 7 miles out. I said, oh well, I'm a bloody good swimmer, why bother? Off we went swimming, and then 6 of us all met up, got hold of an ammunition box. Then the Japanese came back and machine gunned us all in the water. Then the bombers came back and bombed us in the water. All I can remember is a resounding thud up my backside, because I never realized what had happened to me. And the next thing, when I woke up aboard the Vita, a hospital ship. And the surgeon commander came along, and he said, well, you're one of the lucky ones. Out of the 27 of you picked up floating in the ocean, there's only 9 of you alive. Said you had severe peritonitis. I've had to cut you open, take most of your stomach away, and this, that, and the other. He said, but you'll be all right. You see, you're young and you're fit. I said, I know I am. I can remember saying this to him.
It must have been a very difficult decision for him to make. It was more important that he should have his fleet in being as a continuing deterrent to Japanese ideas of coming westward into the Indian Ocean, and running the risk of being criticized for cowardice or lack of drive or whatever. But in the circumstances, I'm not only grateful for my own skin that he did take that line, but I myself feel it was a fully justified one. From the scene of the Ceylon action, we steamed westward and established a rear base at Mombasa in Kenya. The aircraft carriers were withdrawn from the fleet to do more important work. The R-class battleships remained based on Mombasa, maintaining their fleet in being role. The CNC's staff had very little to do, and there was a period of relaxation until activities until the Indian Ocean should become more deeply involved in the war later on.